Hey, Ethan, you've seen The Matrix, right?
I have seen parts of it.
I think there's like three or five or something of them. I don't remember. But in any event, do you remember the scene where they're shooting at Neo and he is in slow motion, moving his body and dodging the bullets, and they're flying right past him in slow motion?
Classic scene.
Yep. Well, I am learning to do that.
You're learning to be Neo and dodge bullets.
Well, it's figurative. It's an analogy, but yeah, I'm learning to do that.
This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Welcome back to another episode of the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast with your two incredible co-hosts, Ethan Nash, that's myself, and
Michael Nash, the elder.
Michael Nash the Elder is his official name. So next time you see him, call him Michael Nash the Elder.
And I want you all to know right now that Ethan is wearing a really cool hat. I never see Ethan wearing hats, and he is wearing a really cool hat right now. I called him a dandy this morning, and we had to look up what that meant. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Flattery is always a great way to start off one of these shows.
Yep.
So appreciate it.
Yeah, I wish we could do these things in person. I miss you, buddy. I miss hanging out together in the same room, but
You know what? We're making the best of it. And podcasting through the screen, it's not the same of having you across the table, but I sure enjoy doing it every time.
I do too.
Anyways, let's stop this boring talk that everybody probably doesn't care about and move on to the show.
Let's get to it.
Which today is going to be an interesting episode, to say the least. We're talking about mindfulness in general, but in the context of leadership as well. And I gotta say, I was pretty nervous to do this show, and I'm not sure why. And what I do when I get nervous, I prepare. I over-prepare. And yesterday, I just started writing down all my notes about all the types of things I could say or might say. And then I kind of had a mindful moment this morning, believe it or not. Very meta, I know. And I realized, okay, I'm just going to do this. I don't need all these notes. This is a subject that, I've spent a good amount of time talking with others about. And so I'm practicing mindfulness during this mindfulness episode. And you know what? I'm excited about it now.
That's really interesting, Ethan. I also have been nervous about this episode, and I think it's because as you and I both have been doing, we've been practicing mindfulness, reading about it, talking to people about it for years, but I'm so not an expert at all on this topic. So coming to this podcast, I'm a little anxious. And what I do when I get anxious is I play spades on my phone. So that's what I did this morning to prepare, is I played spades.
The stark difference between how we react to being nervous is
Yes.
quite astonishing. Neither one of us ever claims to be experts, but we are on kind of this path, journey, whatever you like to call it. And we just found it something that it's important to share. And we've talked about doing this episode for a while, and we've kind of put it off, I think, because we were both a little bit nervous about it. But enough of the preamble. Let's get into it. The first thing I wanted to do for folks listening out there is just kind of define this concept of mindfulness. I know the idea of mindfulness and meditation is very much in vogue these days. I mean, there's magazines dedicated to it. There's, TV shows dedicated to it. So I think it can get a little confusing about what we're talking about here. Do you want to take a stab at kind of defining this broad term mindfulness in the way that you see fit?
I don't have a ready-made definition. I guess if catching me off guard here, I would say mindfulness is, I'm going to make this up off the top of my head. Mindfulness is the practice of learning to really notice and pay attention to everything that's going on inside. It's the practice of being in the moment, in the present moment, focusing. And that was a little messy, but
no,
those are ingredients. Those are ingredients of the definition, I would say.
I like it. I'll give you a definition, and it's not one that I made up myself, but it's my favorite definition that I've found out there. And this is a quote by John Kabat-Zinn, who is I believe, psychologist at a fancy university somewhere. He kind of founded and pioneered a program called mindfulness-based stress reduction. Anyways, his definition is mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally.
Oh, yeah.
I say that again. Mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally.
I like that. What he said. That's what I tried to say.
I thought I would expand the definition of kind of what we're talking about here with mindfulness. I thought I would approach it with a personal kind of just story of like where mindfulness shows up in my life, and I'm sure other people can relate to this. It was a number of years ago. I was actually kind of a vacation, kind of a working vacation. I was still working remotely at the time, but I was sitting in the Caribbeans, actually, on a gorgeous day, and literally a giant butterfly was hatching from a cocoon before my very eyes. And I could see the waves, and I could see this beautiful jungle in front of me. There's actually like beautiful flowers just all around me. And I was drinking very literally the best cup of coffee that I think I've ever had. And as this was all going on, I was rubbing my head and literally cursing under my breath, shaking my head. And I was pissed off because I was dealing with a communication issue as it relates to work. And this issue could be fixed in a 10-minute call. And in fact, it was fixed in a 10-minute call. Right? So I'm pissed off in this absolutely picture perfect scene. And at this time I had been practicing mindfulness for a bit, and I kind of caught myself, and I stopped, and I noticed these kind of angry thoughts and these emotions, and then kind of noticed that I was just thinking without knowing I was thinking that was causing all these thoughts, right? And I was kind of able to stop, take a deep breath, and realize there's people all over the world that would have their prayers answered if they could just be in my situation right now. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that story demonstrates, for one, the idea of how our thoughts can just get us carried away and cause suffering unnecessarily. And it's a bit of an extreme example, but I think that can be applied to kind of your everyday life in a way.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that aspect of mindfulness about being in the moment, refocusing on what's important, being aware of all the distractions, whether emotions or thoughts. I think in reality, we don't know that we're living in all of those emotions and all of those thoughts. We just swim in it.
Absolutely. I think we can dive into this a little bit more later, but I wanted to talk with you a bit about, because I know you've spoken about this with different leaders, and you bring it up in your workshop, and you're a practitioner of mindfulness yourself, but why do you feel strongly that it's an important skill that leaders take up and practice? Because I know you do feel pretty strongly about that.
I do, and it's not a easy or a quick answer, but maybe just a couple points. I will reiterate what you're saying. I actually think it's probably one of the more important practices that a manager or a leader can practice. And the question is why? I guess I'll start with the concept that being a manager is really hard. And you think about all the things even that we've talked about here in this podcast, the ability to stop and be empathetic and to put yourself in the shoes of the person, the employee that you're dealing with, the ability to not be a reactive manager, right? To be able to be non-defensive when you're getting feedback, the ability to stop and make thoughtful decisions. And there's just so many aspects of management that are difficult in and of themselves. But on top of all that, we're dealing with crisis and emergencies, and we're trying to get our own to-do list done every day. And I think as if using myself as an example, I can start my day and just go on autopilot and just go through the day and not bring my best self because I'm being reactive and I'm just barely surviving. And I go back to my, dumb little analogy of Neo in the, in the Matrix. The more I've practiced mindfulness, the more I'm discovering this ability to see everything sort of slow down around me and give myself time. For example, somebody's giving me feedback right now that I'm not really liking. So, Ethan, you're telling me you don't like something I said on the podcast last week. And
it's two things actually.
It was two things, right? And as you're telling me that, of course, I get defensive. I start to feel, maybe I'm feeling attacked. Maybe I'm feeling misunderstood. Maybe my pride gets kind of activated. All these things are happening. Before I practiced mindfulness, I not only would not really notice those things were happening, like I wouldn't really be paying attention, I would then react out of that place of defensiveness, right? And I think that mindfulness has given me the ability to slow everything down. And suddenly I'm able to go, oh, wow, I feel that defensiveness right there in my chest. I can actually feel where it lives in my chest. I become so familiar with this ability to kind of see what's happening inside of me. I think one of the reasons that I want to encourage managers to practice mindfulness is because it gives them this ability to get some distance between what's going on inside of them and then their reaction. They're able to pay attention and notice. And that's just one of the reasons. Again, it's that ability to be able to slow everything down and be in the moment and not be a reactive manager. That's one. And how about you? Let's go back and forth a bit on this. Like what's a reason you think it's a good idea for managers to practice mindfulness?
Yeah. And one thing I quickly want to point out is I know when people talk about mindfulness or meditation, it can sound like it's some sort of panacea, and that's not what it is. It's a tool amongst many tools in the tool belt for, I would say, living a better life and be more, centered with the people around you. So you talked about it's kind of almost an act of being able to slow yourself down to recognize the thoughts, feelings, and emotions that come up in real time sometimes, or at least being able to catch yourself getting wrapped up in feelings and emotions before it's too late, right? You can get off that train before it goes full steam into the wall.
Before you react, before you say something
react, right?
Right.
Let's take a situation. You're with an employee and you are listening to them, giving you excuses of why they're not performing at the level that they're performing. You've brought them in because there's a performance issue. And as a manager, that's your job to monitor performance at some level. And they're giving you excuses. And you're thinking to yourself, gosh, this person is always full of excuses, right? Could they just shut up for a second? Like, what is going on? You know what? I'm about to rip into them and just let them know that this is unacceptable. Now, if you're not realizing that you're kind of lost in those type of thoughts, it's easy to just react and do something you'll probably regret later. As a manager, as we talk about a lot, your job is to build trust and respect with your employees. Yet your employees are still going to do things that are going to piss you off at some times or, make you annoyed, right? But if you just react to those situations without slowing yourself down and recognizing the emotions and feelings that come up, it's going to be very difficult to build the trust and respect if you're reacting in that way. So that's one example to come at it from.
Well, in that example, I just want to kind of hone in on that a little bit. So in that moment that you just described, Ethan, I think mindfulness allows me, number one, to notice what I'm feeling. In that moment, it might be, I'm getting tense, right? I'm getting tense inside and I'm starting to get annoyed and I'm starting maybe even a little bit angry. And I also noticed that impatience. I mean, there's 4 emotions right there I just mentioned that in the past for me would all run together in this sort of sense of not feeling very happy. And I wouldn't have even paid attention to it. So there's 4 emotions that I'm able to identify right then. And then, as you said, there's the thoughts. Oh, I'm thinking this. And I'm thinking, okay, now I can make choices, which is what you're saying. I can now make choices. I can choose, for example, to go into curiosity mode. I can choose to go into empathy mode. I don't have those choices when I'm not aware of the air I'm breathing or the water I'm swimming in.
Just think about this for a second. This idea of being lost in thought. I mean, I would argue, and I think others would argue, that thoughts are what create many of your emotions and feelings, right? You have a thought about something, it's a negative thought, and it creates a negative emotion for you, right? It's almost a feedback loop in that sense. Yet, what I've noticed getting into meditation and mindfulness is that the constant chatter going on in my head, right? And I think this is a thing for most people that I know. When they finally slow down and pay attention, they realize that there's kind of a voice in their head narrating everything they do. And most of the time it's chatting and we don't even know that our thoughts are happening, right? This is why I say lost in thought. You're literally lost in them. They're happening. You don't know they're happening. And the difference between interacting with somebody when you're lost in thought compared to when you're being mindful of them is, I like to say, it's the difference between interacting with somebody while you're like sleepwalking or when you're fully awake and a couple of cups of coffee in, when you're fully dialed in.
Right.
And just imagine how that applies to just being able to listen to people well, right? And pay attention to them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I don't know that we want to get super deep today, but something you just said, Ethan, reminded me, you're talking about thoughts. that we pay attention to. And those thoughts, if we don't catch them, will lead to feelings, which then lead to actions. Okay. I'll go one level deeper than thoughts. It's in the same category, but it's beliefs. And I think we're way less aware of our beliefs than we are of even our thoughts. So for example, meditation has given me insight into my sense of imposter syndrome that I wasn't aware of before. Like, I'm believing that I'm not up for this task. And that's a belief that I didn't even know I had. And that belief that I'm not up to this task leads to feelings of insecurity, defensiveness, frustration. And now I can be aware of those feelings, right? Which allow me then to be aware of my actions before I make those actions.
It's stories that we tell ourselves.
Absolutely.
Our brain, this little person inside of our head, whoever it is, can be a real jerk. Let's be honest. They can be a real freaking jerk. We tell ourselves stories. I mean, I won't go too far down this path, but cognitive behavioral therapy. There's programs that they've mixed mindfulness with cognitive behavioral therapy because it overlaps so much, meaning we get in feedback loops where we tell ourselves stories, right? And being able to be more aware that thoughts just kind of come up on their own. Like I'm not necessarily making them come up. They just rise on their own. I don't necessarily have to identify with them, right? I can choose to have a more realistic story to frame experiences in.
Yeah. Hey, a few more things on why a manager might benefit from practicing mindfulness. I think of things like stress and the ability to just enjoy your moments, as opposed to, everything's difficult, and am I going to do well, and am I going to get everything done? And, how cool to be able to go through your day with a sense of enjoying each moment and enjoying the good things that happen and feeling competent and feeling creative. And it's allowed me to access more empathy. I'm such an expedient. I get stressed out when somebody interrupts me. It's allowed me to really almost, dare I say, enjoy the interruptions.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
You call me up anytime, buddy.
Take a note.
It's allowed me to just, I feel like it's allowed me to bring a better self and to show up in a way that I know is more beneficial to the people in my life. Let's not ignore just basic happiness, right? Just the ability to, access that, the joy of life. It sounds like we're trying to sell this thing, but I tell you what, in our 5-day workshop, one of our topics is, how do you increase your emotional IQ, right? How do you learn, for example, as you said, how to listen so the other person feels heard, or how do you learn how to receive feedback non-defensively? I don't think there's any greater ingredient toward that end than the daily practice of mindfulness.
Totally agree. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your journey, for lack of a better term, into mindfulness. I mean, I know that you haven't practiced it your whole life, right? You weren't born into an environment where that was practiced, I would imagine. How did you kind of find mindfulness and meditation? What does that kind of journey look like for you?
Well, my journey into the practice of mindfulness is super personal, and it comes from, I suffer with what is called CPTSD, as you know, Ethan, which stands for complex post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I'm not going to say a lot about that on this podcast. That is actually a topic of another podcast that I'm working on right now. However, I will say that for me, the practice of mindfulness was probably pretty close to survival, in the sense that I have spent a lot of my life very much in what we call flashback mode, truly having sort of irrational fears that I kind of lived with. I didn't even know I was feeling, having a real amazingly active inner critic. You talked about what a jerk our inner voice can be. I spent my entire life living with an inner critic that had completely turned against me, and several other things. But I guess the bottom line is, when you're living in the kind of ongoing flashback that I've lived in, you really don't know it. You really don't notice it. It's like a fish doesn't even know it's wet. You just live with a state of being that is really actually rather miserable. And mindfulness allowed me, first of all, to basically notice all of that stuff. And then it allowed me to begin to step away from it and to begin to live in what is actually true in my current life right now, which is that I am a good man and there's nothing to be afraid of, and I'm competent and people love me and I love them and I have empathy and all this cool stuff that I just wasn't seeing. And so for me, I'll just say that my pursuit of mindfulness had a bit of a desperation to it, I would say, many, many years ago. And it has morphed from that into really just a commitment to knowing myself and living in the moment and loving others. So that's kind of my big picture journey.
Do you mind me asking, how was it introduced to you?
I was introduced to it simultaneously 2 different ways, almost at the exact same time. One was just I picked up Dan Harris's 10% Happier,
Dan Harris,
really one of my favorite books ever, 10% Happier, which is basically, it's his story of being a news anchor and having a mild, well, not a mild, he had a nervous breakdown on air and discovered that he really needed to find an answer, and he found mindfulness. And at the exact same time, I was actually in some therapy, and I ended up with this just amazing therapist who really believed that one of the best ways to recover and to grow and to thrive was to practice mindfulness. So it was, both of those things happened within the same week. And that launched me in my journey toward digging into this whole concept.
Yeah, that Dan Harris book, 10% Happier, I believe you gave it to me probably around the same time that you first started reading it, right? And was introduced to it. And and you kind of passed that to me at a pretty formative time where I think I needed to get exposed to this practice at that point. Thank you for that, by the way.
You're welcome. And what led you to the practice?
Yeah. So, I mean, I came at it from a very different space than you, obviously. And I think just kind of just goes to show, no matter your life experience, this can be beneficial, because guess what? We all have monkey minds, right? We all evolved to have a mind that was looking for negativity, right? Because that's how it's going to help us survive. I mean, our brains are wired that way. And we've talked about that a lot on this podcast, but I was introduced to the idea of mindfulness and meditation in college, mostly just kind of reading about it and hearing about it. I think I was in college right when it was like really starting to get in vogue, right? And people were talking about it and professors were talking about it. And so I kind of like would practice a little bit, but not really. Like I would do it one day and then maybe not do it for a few months. And so it wasn't until I was my first job out of college, and I really think by all measures, right, I was being successful. I had a good job right out of college. I was, making decent money. I was promoted pretty quickly, and I was managing my own team. And from an outside perspective, I think everybody would look at that and say, wow, he's doing great. He must be really happy. The truth was I was pretty unhappy. And I think you remember this time in my life towards the end of that. It's funny. I was just talking with an old colleague yesterday, and I was telling her the story. But for lack of a better word, I basically had a meltdown towards the end of that job. I was entirely stressed out. I was formed some unhealthy habits, right? I wasn't in the place that I wanted to be. And it was affecting the people that I managed. And I could see that. Like me always being in a stressed out place spilled out onto them, and it affected their job and their performance. Thank God they were all terrific, forgiving people. Anyways, I had a meltdown. And by the way, throughout this time, I would kind of like a little bit still practice mindfulness. But again, it was like I might do it for a week and then I would just stop. And so I wasn't really building much of a habit with that. So anyways, I ended up leaving that job, and where I really started picking it up was I actually went to Thailand for a while. And obviously I was already familiar with the concept. And I went and stayed on a farm with ex-Buddhist monk up in the jungle. And we would spend every morning, we'd wake up at the crack of dawn. We'd spend every morning doing meditation. And then we just kind of work on the farm. But everything, what he introduced me to was the fact that everything you do can be an object of meditation. We think of meditation, we think someone sitting down in the lotus position with their, hands on their knees, breathing, eyes closed. And that certainly is a helpful way of coming at mindfulness practice and meditation practice. But what he showed me is, as you're working on the farm and I'm cutting down grass, that is an act of meditation. when I am on my hands and knees in the Thai jungle, digging out a well in the mud, what most people would just say is the most god-awful job ever, he could see me get worked up and he said, be mindful of everything you do. And so, I mean, that's pretty out there, but that was a formative experience for me to say, like, okay, I think there's a there with this. And it was kind of from that point on that I really took it up as a daily practice. And there's been plenty of helpful tools and apps that have gotten me to make it into a habit. And it's really had a profound impact on just managing my own stress. And I think that if I had these tools in that first job, I don't know if I would still be there now, or I'm glad everything fell into place and I'm not there now. But
so am I,
think,
Ethan. So am I.
Right. I think it would have been a very different experience, and I would have been able to approach the stress in a manner that allowed me to handle it and see reality for what it is.
That's really cool. What a great story. But we really did come at this from very different places.
Yeah. No matter where you're at in your life, I think that we can all use tools to allow us to be more present in the moment. And we've obviously talked about how that is beneficial from a leadership role, but I think we can all tell that it's not exclusive to leadership, right? Your friends, your family. I mean, people sometimes think of meditation as a selfish act, right? Like all the time you spend with yourself to practice it, or just so you could be, feel better or happier. But the truth is, your well-being impacts the people that you love around you as well. So it's not exclusively a selfish act.
I think that's a really important point that you just made. How many times have I talked with a manager who asked me something like this? How do I become more empathetic, right? Or how do I work past this resentment that I'm feeling about this situation? Or how do I feel less X, Y, or Z, or feel more A, B, or C, right? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's not even any other answer than practicing mindfulness and to be able to start to see those changes from the inside out. And then, as you're saying, that absolutely impacts the people around me. It's not just about me. Yeah, it does impact me and makes me happier and makes me healthier. But man, everyone I come in contact with is going to benefit from the fact that I am more mindful and I'm more present and I'm more caring and I'm more empathetic. It's beautiful.
And I just want to say, folks, I mean, there's a lot of different types of meditation and mindfulness, right? I think what we've kind of alluded to a lot here is what we'd call just kind of an open awareness mindfulness, where you're paying attention to what's going on, right? But there's also ways to cultivate self-compassion, which a few days ago I was talking with a friend, and she was talking about how practicing self-compassion mindfulness has allowed her to be able to forgive herself when she messes up, which allows her to continue to grow and develop. And I know that you talk about this, and we talk about this in some of our workshops and our coaching, which is that when we talk about adaptive skills and growing your adaptive skills, you got to be able to have some self-compassion there, or every time you mess up, you're just going to beat yourself up about it, and it's not going to be helpful. So there's a lot of angles. Yeah.
Self-compassion is the absolute number one foundational ingredient for every other good thing you want to cultivate in your life. And I know that sounds really dramatic, but I really have come to believe that it's our inner critic. It's our sense of not having goodness within us. Those are the things that hold us back from everything we actually want to cultivate inside of us. And so I'm just going to emphasize what you're saying. One of the forms of meditation is called self-compassion meditation. And it's something I would strongly recommend that anyone out there who feels that they're struggling with, inner critic issues, just to start a journey down that path. And we'll talk about resources toward the end of our podcast here. Let's talk a little bit about just some ideas, some practices, some strategies. As I'm coaching clients, I often give people sort of a starter kit, in a sense of here's some things that they can start with. We'll mention some specific resources here at the end of the episode, but I would just recommend the most basic practice, which is, and even though this sounds super basic, there's a lot of depth here and there's lots of reading you can do to really fine tune this, but I would recommend, I'm going to say 10 minutes to start, spending some time alone. I prefer mornings just because it's just a great way to start my day. Pre-coffee, post-coffee, I don't care. Find a comfortable place where you feel private and alone, and basically just pay attention for 10 minutes we'll start with your breathing, right? Just pay attention to focus on your breath. And you can focus on the feeling of it coming in and out of your nostrils. You can focus on the feeling of your chest rising and falling. It doesn't matter where you focus, but you just pay attention to your breath. And it's important that when you catch yourself trying to breathe, stop that, because I promise you're breathing whether you're trying to breathe or not. Just watch what's happening. Just watch what's happening. And every time your mind goes away, which you will absolutely go away, you will get distracted and you will go down a path of the Game of Thrones episode you watched last night or what you have to do today. And here's the trick. And this is actually one of the most important parts. You catch that happening, and two things. Number one, you absolutely do not beat yourself up in any way. You don't say, oh, shoot, I messed up at all. Because the second thing that's most important right now is you pull yourself back to your breath. And you just remember that right there is like a rep when you're working out at the gym. Like that coming back is literally the practice. If you don't have those opportunities to come back, you're kind of missing out on the exercising the muscles that we're working on right now. And so you focus on the breath, you end up, inadvertently going away somewhere with your brain. You pull yourself back, and even maybe with a little bit of tenderness and a little bit of kindness and a little bit of humor. Oh, yep, there's that monkey brain. And you come right back and you just stay with it. And you do that over and over and over again. And if you wander away 300 times during those 10 minutes, you just got 300 opportunities to practice coming back.
For those scientifically minded people out there, it's really interesting. They've done experiments where they take some people and they run a scan of their brain. And they're basically looking at the different kind of gray matter that's associated both with stress and with focus. And they put them through a 8-week meditation of 20 or 30 minutes meditation a day. At the end of the 8 weeks, they've actually seen a decrease in the gray matter associated with stress and an increase with the gray matter associated with focus and paying attention, right?
That's called neuroplasticity. And
it's literally changing your brain.
Yes.
I'm glad you said that last piece. I wanted to come back to something that you said briefly, just for some clarification. You mentioned the piece about not beating yourself up, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about, that self-compassion. Now, when you sit down and you kind of, try to focus on the breath, right? Which kind of, I like to say, lets the dust settle a bit, right? You are going to notice thoughts, both thoughts that distract you and thoughts that don't distract you. They just kind of come up and you're seeing them the same way you might be watching a movie, for instance. Those thoughts can be negative thoughts and beating yourself up. Those are going to be some of the thoughts that do arise, right? And the idea is not to try to push them away and say, oh, I don't beat myself up about it, right? I would say the idea is to just be like, oh, I have thoughts that are trying to beat me up about it, and kind of be curious with that, right? And so I guess what I'm specifying here is the difference between pushing away negative thoughts and just being aware of the negative thoughts, including the thoughts about beating yourself up. Does that make sense?
It does. Let's stay on this. Let's clarify the clarification of the clarification, because I think this is really important. First of all, let me say that, and again, you and I haven't really dug into this together too much, but I think we would both agree that the practice of meditation is very progressive. Like it's a stepping stone. Like you practice this one thing and then you practice this next thing. So
yeah, you don't jump on the bench and try to bench press 300 pounds your first time around, right?
That's exactly right.
You do the bar.
Right. And I, of course, will never get to 300 pounds benching anything, but good analogy. So I would say the first period of time, let's say month, whatever, I would really work on just pay attention to the breath. And then when those thoughts come, I would agree, don't push them away, just come back. Like just come back and try not to then feel like you somehow failed because your mind wandered. Almost celebrate the fact that you got a chance to come back. That's what I would do for the first month or two, just breath, and then celebrate every time you get a chance to come back. But the next phase, I would say, would start to get into some of the stuff I think I'm hearing from you, which is, and this is where for me, where meditation really started to be amazing, was you can now start practicing focusing on some other things. For example, you might focus on sounds. Like instead of breath, you might just make part of your meditation just about whatever happens to be going on audibly around you, but you try not to get lost in those things. You just notice, oh, that's a cool sound. And there's birds and there's that. And you just notice. And eventually you start to notice, as you said, thoughts. Oh, there's a thought, right? With curiosity, it's an object. It's something that you see. And then where I think it gets really deep is when you start noticing feelings. And that's where, for me, I would just say the sky opened up. Like, I was amazed. And this was probably a year into it, I'll be honest. But I would say a year into meditation, I started to notice feelings inside of me that I got some distance from them. So it became safe to notice them and look at them with curiosity. And at that point, they begin to change in some really cool ways. So sort of describing a progressiveness of practice.
And I think you're right. And I really do just think this goes to show there's a lot of ways to approach mindfulness, right? And a lot of different techniques and places to start. You know, for instance, for you, it worked to your primary focus of attention would be on the breath to start with.
At the beginning, yeah.
When I first started, that was one of the ways to do it, but also kind of any object of consciousness was helpful for me. So I actually started out with hearing as well, right? And just paying attention to what I'm hearing, or just paying attention to my bodily sensations, right? What does it feel like to have hands, and what does it feel like to have a body? I really think the main thing here is you're choosing to pay attention to something very closely, right? And most people start with the breath because it's convenient and you always have it with you. And I think that's a great place to start. When you start out, you are going to recognize how difficult it is to focus on the breath. If you're like most people, there's some people out there that just have a natural sense of paying attention very closely. I am not one of those people. You're going to notice thoughts and that you're getting lost in thought. So it's not like you're going to be able to sit down and you just see all the thoughts that arise. You're going to like wake up from a dream over and over again. Yep. Oh my gosh, I was just lost in thought for the last 3 minutes when I'm supposed to be meditating. I don't even know what I was just thinking about.
Exactly.
Now that's our normal state most of the time.
Right.
We're almost kind of like zombies walking around in a sense like that. Right. So I loved what you said, that when you recognize that you've been distracted in thought, and then you come back to focusing on the breath, or maybe it's hearing, that is actually the point right there.
You just did it.
That is the exercise.
Yep. You just succeeded right there.
And when you remember that, it makes it a lot easier to not beat yourself up, because you're like, I am bringing myself back over and over again. Those are bicep curls for the brain, as Dan Harris said.
That's exactly right. And all the time you're doing this, just kind of keep in the very, very, very back of your mind, there's actually a purpose to all this. Just remember that it's going to change your brain. There's going to be benefits, and you might not see any results. In fact, I would probably guarantee that you're not going to see any results for a little while.
Yeah.
That's okay.
It is okay. Again, it is a practice. It is a training. We made the analogy to physical training a couple of times just because I think it really is the perfect analogy, right? You don't just get to start going to the gym and all of a sudden you're, an Olympic athlete. Right? It's practice, but it's worth the time. And that's speaking from someone that hasn't done it my whole life, right? I'm still, I would say, on the beginning stages of doing this. And I'm glad I went down that path. So
yeah, me too.
I would just say, to sum up what we're saying, the basic steps that I know you and I started with are: step 1, sit down. Step 2, try to focus on your breath. Step 3, and this is the easiest step, fail to focus on your breath for very long, right? Step 4, the final step, is notice the kind of thoughts that are making you fail. Notice the kind of thoughts that are coming up that are making you fail from focusing on the breath, and then start over again.
Come back, right?
Come back to the breath.
Yep. With leaving a little bit of sense of celebration. I came back.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
There's one more practice I just want to mention. It's so quick, really quick. And you reminded me of this when you were talking about your trip to Thailand. And I just want to just one other thing you can do throughout the day that's just so cool. And I'll just give you a quick example. It's very much like you're digging a well. So let me ask you, typically, if you're not practicing, right, what are you probably thinking about, Ethan, when you're washing dishes?
Oh, it could be a billion different things. And most of the time I don't actually know what I'm thinking about, but it's usually work, it's relationship, it's somebody that I feel like I might have upset that day and I'm feeling bad about, or people that piss me off. I mean, to be honest, a lot of it can be brewing on negative thoughts.
Well, that's because there's something wrong with you. No, just kidding.
Right, yeah.
That's because you're human, right? You're human, right? Because that old phrase, our brains are Teflon for good and Velcro for bad, right? We're constantly, one of the reasons we were able to survive the eons of evolution is we were very hyper-focused on the negative, so that we could keep ourselves safe. So basically, normally I'm washing dishes, and I either have no idea what happened to my brain during that time, or I'm pondering some worry or solving some problem or whatever it might be. But a really cool practice is just take 5 minutes while you're washing dishes or whatever it is. This could be in the shower, whatever it is you're doing, just experience every single thing you're experiencing. Like the water, how it feels in your hands, the feel of the pan and the feel of the scrubby, right?
Is that the technical term, the scrubby?
This can be going on a walk, right? In fact, some of my favorite meditation is where I actually go on a walk, and instead of doing the breath, I'm focusing on the feel of my feet, just up and down, hitting the pavement, just focusing on something that actually has a little bit of pleasure to it. It's just another cool way to practice.
I must have been last year. I ended up going on a week-long silent meditation retreat, and not anything I recommend for someone that hasn't, practiced it for a little bit at least, right? It can be very challenging, and it was. But the whole concept of it was everything we do, we are trying to be mindful and in a meditation state. And after a number of days, take eating, for instance, we only had, we had 2 meals a day, just focusing on every single bite and what it feels like, right, was really interesting. Because I realized I actually don't have as many food cravings as I thought I did. And the sweet things that I thought I craved, when I really pay attention to it, actually sometimes it's even like a little bit too sweet when I really focus in. And so I don't know, I mean, when you can integrate it into your everyday life, in a conversation, having a mindful conversation, paying your taxes, right? Just focusing in on that. I mean, it can get you from a place of this really sucks to this is okay. And life is good right now. And I'm content.
Yeah,
so
that's really good.
I wanted to wrap this episode up just by giving people a few resources that have helped you and I, and we probably have some similarities and some different ones. The one thing I know we both talked about so far is 10% Happier, a book by Dan Harris. And I believe there's also his own meditation app called 10% Happier. I haven't used that. I don't know if you have, but I hear it's pretty good.
I have. Let's stay on Dan Harris just for a second. 10% Happier, and then his follow-up book, which I just loved, which is Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. And that actually was the first how-to book I've ever read. And it was such a fun read, which made it nice, but it was really cool because he outlines, I think, 7 different types of meditation in that book. And then, yes, his app, the 10% Happier app, is a really, really great resource.
The app that really got me started out and forming a habit was an app called Headspace. It's a pretty popular one. I find that really helpful. And just, I get asked sometimes, hey, do you actually need an app to do meditation? The answer is no, you don't. But basically what an app does is it provides you a guided meditation, and it kind of reminds you to refocus again on what you're trying to focus on. These little reminders of catching you lost in thought and being like, okay, refocus. So for getting started, I find that really helpful. And kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, you mentioned, maybe 10 minutes is a good place to start. For me personally, I go as far as to tell people 2 minutes. Start with 2 minutes and do that for a month. And that's what Headspace has you do, is it really these tiny segments, and then it slowly gets up to 10 minutes, right? And you're more likely to stick with something if you think, oh, I can do that. It's just 2 minutes, right? That's how you start to build a habit. So anyways, I digress, but Headspace is a helpful one.
Yeah, it's good. And then there's another app. I think both of us have accessed the Waking Up. Do you use Waking Up app?
Yeah, I use a Waking Up app just about every day now. I start off with the guided meditation for about 10 minutes, and then I'll just go into my own silent one after that.
For our listeners, that's Sam Harris. Sam Harris's Waking Up app.
Not to be confused with Dan Harris, which was the other one. So the Sam Harris is Dan Harris. So for those people that are local to Washington State, and specifically in kind of the west side of the mountains in Washington State, there is an organization called Mindfulness Northwest, and they do a terrific job. I have done a mindfulness-based stress reduction course with them. I did my week-long silent meditation retreat with them, and then I've done what was the one both you and I did?
So it was a self-compassion through Mindfulness Northwest,
yeah.
Right?
So I would look up that organization if you're in the area.
Yeah, and I'll mention, speaking of self-compassion, it's again, it's a bit of a one-off from sort of the classic meditation we're talking about here, but I just love the self-compassion workbook that we used in that class. That's by Kristen Neff. And that's available on Amazon and your other shopping spots. And then Susan Salzberg, have you read anything of hers?
I have a couple books of her. Real Happiness.
Yes, that's the 28-day program. And that's a really great place to start too. It's called Real Happiness, a 28-day program for realizing the power of something. I can't remember what it's called right now, but that's Susan Salzberg.
And she actually has a follow-up from that book called Real Happiness at Work that is specifically geared towards integrating it into, obviously, your work life. I found that one really helpful.
Wow, there's kind of a good way to bookend our conversation, coming right back to managers. And why should managers learn this skill, right?
Right. Well, I think we gave them enough resources here of all different flavors. So I will link to all of those in the show notes so you can see what we're talking about, all the books, all the resources we're talking about.
Awesome. That's great. And again, managers, if you're still skeptical, I don't blame you. I would just ask you to consider that this could be a bit of a game changer. So grab one or two of those resources and be curious and give it a try.
When I was in Thailand and working with that Buddhist monk, I was the skeptic. And I asked him straight up, well, do I have to become a Buddhist in order to kind of get to a high level of meditation? Because that's not really my cup of tea. And he was very clear. He goes, Buddhist? I'm not a Buddhist anymore.
That's awesome.
And so, again, this doesn't have to be steeped in religiosity or anything like that. It really is a project that anybody can take up, and it can really make an impact. So I'll leave you with that, folks. You know what? This has been a fun episode.
Yeah,
I don't know why I was nervous. We'll come back to this topic at a later time. But until then, be well, be kind to each other. Bye. Hey, folks, this is Ethan. Hey, one last thing before you go. I wanted to let you know about a new offering that we have available. We are now offering a group coaching service. You don't have to go at it alone when it comes to the rewards and challenges of leadership. Whether it's navigating a sticky situation or finding creative ways to motivate your employees, we found that being part of a leadership group can help you discover collaborative ideas, get support, and contribute to the success of others. By exploring group dynamics and key leadership skills in real time, group coaching can elevate your leadership to the next level. So we're going to get this going probably at the beginning of 2021. If you're interested in exploring what it would look like to be a part of a group coaching community, please reach out to us. You can contact us at contact@nashconsulting.com. Again, that's contact@nashconsulting.com. We're really excited about this one. We've been putting in a lot of hard work to make this a really valuable experience for folks. So reach out to us. All right, that's all. Thanks.